The translation feed cut out before I even finished my first sentence. Not a technical glitch. I knew that. The Galactic Council station had technology so advanced it could translate 17,000 languages simultaneously across 12 dimensions of meaning. Their feed did not cut out by accident. It cut out because the Thraxian delegate, a towering creature with 4 arms and the posture of someone who had never once been told no, had pressed a button on his console the moment I opened my mouth. He smiled at me with all 3 of his mouths. The center one, I had been briefed, was the one they used for contempt. I am Yara Osei. I am 41 years old, born in Accra, raised in London, and for the past 6 years I have served as Earth's senior ambassador to the outer reaches. I have negotiated resource treaties with the Velhari, de-escalated 2 border disputes with the Chekori Collective, and once talked a rogue mining consortium out of drilling a moon that turned out to be a protected burial site for 11,000 years of Macan remains. I am not easily rattled. But sitting in that chamber, on a chair that was, and I measured this later, because I needed to know I was not imagining it, exactly 4 centimeters lower than every other chair at the table, I felt something cold move through me. Not fear. Something older than fear. Recognition. This was never a negotiation. This was a sentencing. The chamber itself was extraordinary, and I noticed every detail because noticing details is the only thing that keeps me calm when the ground is shifting beneath me. The room was circular, carved from a single piece of asteroid stone that the Galactic Council called the Foundation Rock, dragged from the center of the galaxy 3,000 years ago as a symbol of their authority. 9 species sat in a crescent around the central floor, their delegations arranged in order of their joining date. The oldest species, the Orin, sat at the highest point of the crescent. Their representative was a creature so ancient that she communicated only through a translation device attached to what I assumed was her throat. Her name, as best as any human language could approximate, was something like Vel. Vel had not looked at me once since I entered the room. On my left, the Thraxian delegate was already speaking again, even though I had not finished. His name was Drovan, and he wore his species' traditional ceremonial armor, which looked less like formal wear and more like a message. His people had expanded across 40 star systems in the past century through what the Council diplomatically called progressive territorial integration, and what the species who had lived on those planets called something considerably less diplomatic. The Council had welcomed them warmly. Humanity had pushed into 11 star systems over 40 years, mostly uninhabited, and we were here to answer for it. Drovan's voice was amplified through the chamber's sound system, smooth and confident. My translation device, a small piece of technology fitted behind my ear, rendered his words in clear English. The species known as humanity has demonstrated, repeatedly, a pattern of expansion without consultation, settlement without permission, and technological development that proceeds at a rate inconsistent with their registered civilizational age. They are, in the simplest terms, a young species behaving as though they are not. Several delegates shifted in their seats. 2 made sounds that my briefing documents had identified as laughter equivalents. My briefing documents. I had read all 412 pages of them on the journey here. They had been prepared by a team of 37 analysts back on Earth, led by a quiet, precise woman named Carol Adkins who had spent 20 years studying the Galactic Council's internal politics. Carol had told me, 3 days before departure, something I had not stopped thinking about since. They will try to make you feel small, she had said, standing at the window of her office in Geneva, watching cargo ships cross the sky. Every gesture, every seating arrangement, every delayed translation feed, it will be designed to remind you that in their estimation, you do not belong at the table. Your job is not to convince them otherwise. Your job is to let them believe they have succeeded. I had asked her what came after that. She had smiled, and it was the kind of smile that holds a great deal of information behind it. That part is not your job, she said. Your job ends the moment you walk out of the room. Drovan was still talking. He had moved from humanity's expansion patterns to our military capacity, which he described as modest, if earnest. He said this with the kind of warmth one might use to compliment a child's drawing. The Chekori delegate, a 6-limbed creature named Savik who I had actually met twice before under friendlier circumstances, did not laugh, but he did not speak up either. That stung more than Drovan's words. Humanity's fleet, Drovan continued, represents no credible deterrent to any established power within this council. Their most advanced vessel, the carrier-class ship they call the Meridian, would be outgunned by a standard Thraxian patrol ship. We mention this not to threaten, but to clarify the reality of the situation. Humanity should negotiate from an understanding of what they are. There was a pause in the chamber. Deliberate. Theatrical. They are a Coast Guard, Droven said, with ambitions. The laughter was genuine this time. Even Vel, ancient and still as stone, made a small sound. I sat with my hands folded on the table in front of me, and I counted the exits. There were 4. The main entrance behind me, through which I had walked with my 2-person delegation. A service corridor to the left, behind the Orin section. An emergency pressure door at the base of the curved wall to my right, which I suspected connected to the station's main transit hub. And directly behind Droven, barely visible between 2 decorative columns, a 4th door that was not listed on any of the station schematics I had been given. Interesting. I had also, during Droven's speech, counted the station's power cycles. The lights in the chamber dimmed by approximately 3% every 47 minutes, which meant the station was running its primary systems on a rotation to manage load. That was a choice made by a system under strain, not a system operating comfortably. The station, for all its grandeur, was stretched thin. Also interesting. I had been authorized to speak for 45 seconds. That was the term the council had set, and Carol's team had advised accepting it without protest. Pick your confrontations carefully, the briefing had said. Do not spend your energy on the small humiliations. The moderator, a Velhari official whose species communicated partly through color changes in their skin, indicated that humanity's speaking time had begun. The timer on my side of the table activated. 45 seconds. I stood. I looked at each delegate in turn, slowly enough that each one registered my attention. Droven met my gaze with amusement. Vel continued looking at something above my head. Savik, to his credit, met my eyes and held them. I said 7 words. Humanity respectfully declines to continue these proceedings. Then I picked up the single document I had placed on the table when I arrived, a sealed folder containing a message that would not be opened for another 6 hours, and I walked toward the main exit. The chamber exploded. Not in the dramatic way that phrase usually implies. There was no shouting, no sudden movement. It was more like a pressure change, the way a room feels when a window is opened during a storm. Every delegate leaned forward at once. Droven rose from his seat, all 4 arms spread wide, beginning a sentence that my translation device caught the start of, "This is absolutely not," before the door closed behind me. My aide, a young man named Oliver Grant who had been standing against the back wall and who I was fairly certain had not breathed since I stood up, fell into step beside me without a word. He was 26, had 2 advanced degrees, and had been told this posting would be a formative experience. He looked like a person whose definition of formative was being actively revised. We walked down the corridor in silence. Our footsteps echoed on the station floor, which was made of the same asteroid stone as the chamber, polished smooth by 3,000 years of feet. After about 30 seconds, Oliver said, very quietly, "Did that just happen?" "Yes," I said. "And we planned for this?" "Yes," I said. He processed that for a moment. "Carol is terrifying," he said. "Carol," I agreed, "is the most dangerous person I have ever met." We reached the docking bay. Our shuttle was waiting. As we boarded, I allowed myself one small thing I had not permitted in the chamber. I exhaled. Long and slow and all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. Then I pulled out my communicator and sent a single coded message back to Earth. It contained no words. Just a number, 1. Meaning the first phase was complete. By the time that shuttle cleared the station's gravity well, 17 things had already begun to move. The Galactic Council just did not know it yet. Oliver did not sleep on the way back to the Meridian. I know because I did not sleep either, and every time I came out of my cabin to check the navigation display, he was already in the small crew lounge, sitting with a cup of something warm and staring at the star field through the viewport like it owed him an explanation. The 3rd time this happened, I sat down across from him. "Ask," I said. He turned from the viewport. He had the look of someone who had arranged a very careful list of questions and was now trying to decide which one was least likely to make him sound foolish. Oliver Grant was extremely good at his job and extremely afraid of sounding foolish, which was a combination I understood completely. "The folder," he said finally. "The one you left on the table. What about it? What's in it?" I looked at him for a moment. He had clearance for most of what I knew. Not all of it, but most. And he had just walked out of a room with me in front of 9 alien civilizations without flinching, which I thought earned him something. "A proposal," I said. "A genuine one." Equitable trade terms, shared navigation rights through the Ashkari Rift, and a medical supply agreement that the Velhari have needed for 4 years. Oliver blinked. We left them a good offer. We left them an excellent offer. He was quiet for a moment. So we walked out of the room and left them an excellent offer. Yes. Why? I leaned back in my chair. Outside the viewport, the stars moved in the slow, patient way they always do, indifferent to everything happening between the tiny warm creatures traveling among them. Because they needed to understand something before they could read it properly, I said. If I had handed them that folder at the table, with our chairs lower than theirs and their translation delay running, and Drovan already halfway through his speech about coast guards, they would have read it as weakness. They would have seen a species asking for mercy and dressing it up as an offer. Oliver nodded slowly. But now they have read it in a room where we just walked out. They are reading it as people who have just experienced something they did not expect. And they will understand, perhaps for the first time, that they have not been dealing with a species that needs their approval. I picked up his cup, realized it was empty, and set it back down. They have been dealing with a species that was simply waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. He thought about this for a long time. Then he said, "How long have we been planning this?" Carol's team started the analysis 9 years ago, I said. The trade data, the supply chain mapping, the route studies. 9 years of very quiet, very patient work. 9 years, Oliver repeated. He said it the way people say numbers when the number suddenly has a physical weight. What did they find? This was the part one had been carrying for 6 months, since Carol had called me into her office and shown me the report summary on a screen she then locked and placed in a vault. The part that had changed the way I looked at the galaxy. They found 3 things, I said. The first is that every faster-than-light drive manufactured by any council species in the past 60 years uses a stabilizing isotope called veronite. It prevents the quantum cascade that would otherwise tear the drive apart during jump. Without veronite, no FTL. No trade routes, no fleet movements, no council as a functioning body. Oliver waited. Humanity discovered veronite deposits on a moon in the Kessler system 32 years ago, I said. We have been quietly, carefully mapping every deposit in reachable space. We control access to 74% of the total known supply. Oliver set down his empty cup very carefully, as if he needed both hands free for what was coming. The second thing, I continued, is a compound called Maravil. It treats a degenerative neurological condition that affects the Velhari population at a rate of roughly 30%. Without ongoing treatment, the condition is fatal within 3 years. The Velhari have been sourcing Maravil from a synthesization planet in the outer reaches. Let me guess, Oliver said. The planet is human-settled, I confirmed. Has been for 11 years. We did not buy it because of the compound. We settled it because it had good soil and a breathable atmosphere. We discovered the compound 7 years in, when one of our agricultural chemists noticed the local soil bacteria producing something unusual. Carol's people identified what it was. Oliver let out a long breath. And the third thing? The Ashkari Rift, I said. It is an unstable region of space between the Council's core systems and their eastern expansion territories. Most navigable routes around it add between 40 and 90 travel days depending on vessel class. The rift itself is passable but dangerous, gravitational anomalies, unpredictable particle storms. Only 2 species have ever successfully navigated it. The Oran, Oliver said, because he had read the briefing documents too. And humans, I said. We found a stable corridor through the rift 18 months ago. Our navigators have made the transit 11 times. We have shared none of this with the Council. The crew lounge was very quiet. The ship hummed around us, steady and reliable, the way the Meridian always was. Oliver said, very slowly, so when they threatened consequences for us walking out. They threatened a species that controls their fuel supply, their medical supply for their most vulnerable member, and the only shortcut through the most strategically important region of contested space, I said. They just did not know they were doing that. Because we never told them. Because we were waiting. Because we were waiting, I agreed. Oliver sat back. He looked out at the stars again. His expression had changed, not frightened, exactly, but the way a person looks when they realize the building they are standing in is considerably larger than it appeared from the outside. Carol is terrifying, he said again. A message arrived on my communicator. I looked at it. It was from the Council's communications office, flagged as urgent. The subject line read, "Formal request for continued dialogue." 6 hours ago they had been explaining to me what humanity was. Now they were requesting dialogue. I showed Oliver the message. He read it. Then he read it again. "The tone is different," he said. "It is," I agreed. "They are not demanding. They are asking." "They are," I agreed. He looked up at me. "That is where the actual negotiation starts, isn't it?" I smiled. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the smile of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down for a moment. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly where it starts." I typed a brief reply to the council's message. 4 words. "I will be in touch." Then I put my communicator away and finally, for the first time in 72 hours, I went to sleep. When I woke up, 2 more messages were waiting. The second one was from a council member I had not heard from before, Vel, the Orin representative, oldest living member of the Galactic Council, who had not looked at me once during the entire session. Her message contained 1 sentence. "I have been waiting for this conversation for 30 years. They had rebuilt the table." I know that sounds like a small thing. Perhaps even a petty thing to notice. But when you have spent your career studying the architecture of power, how rooms are arranged, who sits where, what height the chairs are, which direction the light falls, a rebuilt table is not a small thing. A rebuilt table is an admission. I walked into the chamber on the 3rd day after our return to the station, and the first thing I saw was that the single isolated seat that had been designated for humanity's delegation was gone. In its place were 3 seats, equal in height to every other seat in the room, positioned not at the far end of the crescent but within it. We had been moved from the defendant's position to the participant's position, and someone had made that decision deliberately and overnight, which meant the decision had been difficult and the person who made it had pushed hard for it. I found out later it was Vel. Oliver walked beside me. He had slept, eaten a proper meal, and was now wearing the expression of someone who had decided to be quietly extraordinary instead of quietly frightened. I appreciated the shift. The chamber felt different with the new arrangement. Not smaller, but more honest. The theatrical grandeur was still there, the foundation rock walls, the ambient lighting designed to make the space feel ancient and authoritative, but it had a crack in it now. A hairline fracture. The kind you can only see if you know where to look. Droven was already seated when we arrived. He was not wearing his ceremonial armor today. I noticed that too. Vel spoke first. She was the oldest member of the council and therefore held the right of first address at any emergency session, which was what this had been officially classified as. Her translation device rendered her words in a voice that was low and measured, with an occasional pause that I had come to realize was not hesitation but emphasis. "Humanity's delegation walked out of this chamber 3 days ago," she said. At the time, several members of this council characterized that action as impulsive. As emotional. As a demonstration of exactly the kind of unregulated behavior that had prompted this session in the first place. A pause. I did not share the characterization. I suggested instead that we read the document left behind before drawing any conclusions about the nature of the action. I was overruled. The document was read anyway, privately, by every delegation present within 4 hours of humanity's departure. I suspect everyone in this room knows what it contained. Silence. Absolute and total. I had not expected Vel to open this way. I had prepared for another round of positioning, another round of small strategic provocations designed to test how far I would absorb before responding. I had not prepared for an elder species representative to simply state the reality of the situation with the calm directness of someone who no longer had patience for theater. I decided I liked Vel enormously. The proposal humanity left, Vel continued, is equitable. It addresses navigation rights, resource access, and medical supply in terms that benefit council members significantly. It asks for nothing that any reasonable reading of galactic law would not already require us to offer. The question before this session is not whether to accept it. The question is why it took a walkout to make us read it properly. Droven shifted in his seat. I watched him without watching him, the peripheral awareness that good negotiators develop over years of practice, the ability to track movement without directing your gaze at it. He was uncomfortable. Not angry, the way I had expected him to be, but something more complex. Something that looked, if I was reading him correctly, like a species-specific equivalent of embarrassment. I filed that away. Savik, the Chekori delegate who had not spoken during our first session, leaned forward. The Chekori delegation would like to formally second the High Oran's framing of this session, he said. He looked at me briefly, and in that look I read something I had not expected either. Apology. Genuine and quiet and too late to undo anything, but real. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage, which in human diplomatic language means, received and accepted, let us move forward. The Velhari delegate, whose name was Karen and whose species communicated partly through the color shifts in their translucent skin, had been a pale, steady silver-white since I walked in. I had done enough study on Velhari biometrics to know that silver-white was the color of controlled urgency. They needed something, and they were trying very hard not to let that need make them vulnerable. I already knew what they needed. The Maryville supply agreement was in the proposal. It had been drafted by a human medical researcher named Grace Linton, who had spent 11 years studying Velhari neurology and had included in her supply terms not just a delivery schedule but a knowledge transfer provision, meaning humanity would train Velhari scientists to synthesize the compound independently within 20 years. We were not just offering medicine. We were offering the end of dependency. That part had apparently caused considerable private discussion among the council delegations in the 3 days since we walked out, because it made no strategic sense to them. Why would a species voluntarily give away leverage? I had a prepared answer for when that question was eventually asked. But it was not the moment yet. What was happening now was that Drovan was speaking. He had waded through Vel's opening, through Savik's statement, and now he was finding his footing, and it was not the footing he had been standing on 3 days ago. The Thraxian delegation, he said carefully, acknowledges that the session 3 days prior may have been structured in a manner that did not reflect the protocols appropriate to formal dialogue between established parties. He stopped there. Every delegate in the room knew how much those words had cost him. So did I. I let the words land. I did not respond immediately, because in moments like this, the response matters less than the silence that comes before it. Silence says, I heard you. Silence says, I am not in a rush. Silence says, your discomfort does not threaten me. Then I said, the human delegation accepts that acknowledgement and is prepared to engage in good faith from this point forward. Clean. No addition. No twist of the knife. Carol had been very clear on this point. When an adversary takes a step toward you, you do not make them regret it. You meet them where they are. The session continued for 4 hours. It was nothing like the first one. Questions were asked and answered. The navigation terms were examined in detail. The Chekori raised a concern about the Ashkari Rift corridor access and whether it could be managed safely for their vessel classes, and Oliver produced specifications within 12 minutes because we had anticipated that exact question and prepared the documentation in advance. At one point the Thraxian technical advisor, a quieter member of Drovan's delegation named Preth, asked who had conducted humanity's navigational survey of the rift. Oliver named the survey team. Preth asked how many passes they had made before declaring a stable corridor. Oliver said 11. Preth was quiet for a moment and then said, with what sounded like genuine respect, that is exceptional work for a species of your navigational history. Oliver said, politely, we are a species that learns quickly. It was a perfectly calibrated response. Not aggressive. Not self-deprecating. Simply true. The session broke without a signed agreement, which I had expected. These things take time even when the power dynamics are clear, because the administrative and political machinery of 9 civilizations does not move in an afternoon. But as the delegations began to disperse, I became aware of someone at my shoulder. It was a young Velhari official. Not Karen, the senior delegate, but a junior member of their team whose skin was cycling through colors I had not seen from a Velhari before, a quick alternation between pale gold and soft green that my briefing documents had not covered. I made a mental note to ask about it later. Ambassador Osei, they said. Their translator rendered their voice as a light, clear tone. I want to say something that is not an official statement. I turned to face them fully. Then I am listening unofficially. I have studied humanity, they said. For 6 years. It is my specialty within our diplomatic service. And I have believed, for most of that time, that our council's assessment of your species was incorrect. They paused. The gold and green flickered. I am glad that you made them see it. Even if the method was uncomfortable. I looked at them for a moment. They were young, in the way that Velhari youth read, something in the speed of the color shifts, the brightness of them. Young and earnest and carrying something careful behind their eyes. What is your name? I asked. Lyres, they said. Lyres, I said, the method was uncomfortable for a reason. When something is designed to be invisible, sometimes you have to make a loud noise to reveal it. I paused. But loud noises are not a strategy. They are a signal. What comes after the noise is what matters. Leary's considered this. Their skin settled into a steady, warm amber. I did not have the precise translation for amber, but it felt, in context, like thoughtfulness. I think, they said, that your species has been practicing patience for a very long time. We have, I said. We learned it the hard way. They inclined their head, a gesture I recognized as a Velhari farewell, and moved away to rejoin their delegation. I stood for a moment in the thinning chamber, in the room where 3 days ago I had sat in a lower chair and been described as a Coast Guard with ambitions. That night, for the first time since leaving Earth, I allowed myself to feel something I had been holding carefully at arm's length. Not triumph. Not relief exactly. Something quieter and more sustaining than either of those things. Something that felt, if I was honest with myself, like the beginning of something real. The room Vel had arranged for our private meeting was nothing like the council chamber. It was small, almost intimate by the station's scale, with walls made of a dark, smooth material that absorbed sound and light in equal measure. There were 2 chairs, equal height, I noted, and a low table between them with 2 containers of something warm that smelled faintly of minerals and something I could not name. Vel arrived 3 minutes after I did. She moved slowly, supported by a device that floated at her side and adjusted its height automatically to keep pace with her. Up close, she was remarkable. Her species, the Oran, were the oldest in the known galaxy. Their civilization predated the Council itself by 8,000 years. She was, according to what information was available, somewhere between 900 and 1100 years old. The range existed because the Oran did not count their years the way other species did, and she had declined to clarify. Her face was, and I am aware this is an imprecise description, patient. Deeply, structurally patient, in the way of something that has watched many things begin and end and has stopped being surprised by either. She sat. I sat. The translation device at her throat produced her voice smoothly, with none of the mechanical quality I had noticed in the chamber. You handled today well, she said. You gave me a strong opening, I said. The closest thing to a smile that her features could produce appeared and disappeared quickly. I gave you an honest one. They are occasionally the same thing. She picked up one of the containers, regarded it briefly, set it down. I want to tell you something that the Council does not formally discuss, because formally acknowledging it would require formally addressing it, and formal address is complicated. I said nothing. Listening is a form of speaking, when used correctly. The Galactic Council has been monitoring your species for 81 years, Vel said. Since the first evidence of your space travel capability. Standard practice, we observe all emerging species from the moment they leave their home system. Most emerging species follow a predictable arc. Exploration, then contact, then a period of adjustment as they learn where they sit in a larger order of things. She paused. Humanity did not follow the arc. In what way? I asked, though I suspected I already knew some of the answer. In every way, she said. Your medical development exceeded our projections by 40 years. Your recursive artificial intelligence containment protocols were developed independently. We had never seen a species develop them without prior contact with species who had already made the relevant mistakes. Your expansion was not random. It was deliberate and mapped along lines that suggested an awareness of galactic geography that you should not have possessed at your development stage. I thought of Carol. Of the quiet rooms in Geneva. Of 37 analysts and 9 years of careful, silent work. And this alarmed the Council, I said. It alarmed certain members of the Council, Vel corrected, with a precision that told me she was choosing her words very deliberately. There was a school of thought that said the correct response was accelerated integration, bring humanity into the Council structure early, provide the framework, manage the trajectory. I supported that school. I have supported it for 30 years. And the other school? I asked. Vel was quiet for a moment. The other school believed that a species developing at your rate, without guidance, was a variable that could not be reliably predicted. And that variables which cannot be predicted are, by definition, risks. I felt something shift in my understanding of the past 3 days. Of the lowered chairs and the delayed translation feeds and the 45-second speaking limit and Droven's comfortable contempt. It had not just been arrogance. It had been fear wearing arrogance like a coat. The peace talks, I said slowly, were not about our expansion. No, Vel said. They were about containing a species before it became difficult to contain. Vel regarded me with those ancient, patient eyes. The word I would use is managing. But the meaning is similar. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about humanity's history, the long, complicated, frequently painful history of our own species trying to manage and contain what it did not understand. We had made that mistake so many times and in so many directions that we had written entire libraries about it. We had eventually, painfully, learned something from those libraries. The galaxy, apparently, had not read them yet. The walkout, I said. What did it change, specifically? It demonstrated that you understood the dynamic, Vel said. A species that submits to a performance of authority does not understand the game. A species that walks away from it has already moved past it. You did not react with anger. You did not react with demands or escalation. You simply declined to participate on terms that were not yours, left a reasonable proposal on the table, and waited. She paused. That is not the behavior of a young civilization. That is the behavior of a civilization that has thought carefully about what it is and what it wants. Grace Linton had said something similar, in different words, when she submitted the Maryville proposal with its knowledge transfer clause. I had asked her why she had included it, why give away what we could keep. She had looked at me with the mild patience of someone who spends most of her time thinking about how bodies survive things that should kill them, and she had said, because the goal is not to be needed forever. The goal is to be the kind of neighbor that is good to have. I told Vel this. She was still for a long time after. Then she said something I was not expecting. I have been watching your species for 30 years, as I mentioned. In that time, I have seen you fail often. Publicly. In ways that other council species used as evidence that you were not ready for participation in galactic affairs. You argued among yourselves. You made decisions that were reversed a generation later. You caused harm you did not intend and then spent enormous energy trying to understand and repair it. She paused. I found this more impressive than any of your technical achievements. I looked at her. Why? Because every other species in this council achieved stability by resolving their internal contradictions before reaching space, she said. By the time they joined us, they were settled. Agreed. Unified in the way that long-established civilizations become unified. Something moved through her expression, too quick for me to fully read. But unified things do not grow. They maintain. Your species arrived here still in the process of becoming something. Still arguing about what you were and what you wanted to be. That process, that argument, is not a weakness. It is the engine. I thought about my grandmother, who had fled one country and built a life in another and argued loudly at every family dinner about what home meant and had died still not entirely agreeing with herself about the answer. I thought about Carol, who had spent 9 years building a strategic framework not for dominance but for conversation. I thought about Grace Linton giving away her compound synthesis method because the goal was to be a good neighbor. We do not always agree on where we are going, I said. No, said Vel, but you keep moving. In my experience, the species that know exactly where they are going are the ones that stop. She rose from her chair, slowly. I will support your full membership application when it is formally submitted. I have 7 votes in this council through alliance agreements. I will use them. I stood too. That is generous. It is practical, she said. The galaxy is going to become something new in the next 100 years. I would rather help shape what that is than watch it happen from a distance. She looked at me with those 900-year-old eyes. Your species is going to be part of what the galaxy becomes. I decided, 30 years ago, that I would rather meet you properly before that happened. I said, I think we should have been introduced sooner. The closest thing to a smile appeared again. This time it stayed a moment longer. Yes, she said. I rather think so too. I walked back to my quarters on the station that night with my hands in my pockets and the weight of the conversation settling into me the way important things do, not all at once, but in layers, each one revealing something the one before had covered. They had feared our pace. Our unpredictability. Our refusal to fit the shape they had made for us in their projections. And they had tried to manage that fear by meeting us at the lowest point of our confidence, surrounding us with signals of our own smallness, hoping to anchor us there before we understood how much ground we had actually covered. But we had read Carol's report. We had mapped the Veronite deposits. We had navigated the Ashkari Rift 11 times. We had synthesized Maravil and then, instead of hoarding it, offered to teach others how to make it themselves. We had not been sitting still while they were looking at us. And now they knew it. Vel had said it, in the clear, quiet voice of someone who had watched civilizations rise and flatten across 1,000 years. They should have feared our patience. She was right. We had been patient for a long time. We had sat at tables that were designed to diminish us, and we had smiled and counted exits and listened carefully and waited for the moment when waiting was no longer the strategy. I reached my quarters. I sat on the edge of the bed. Outside the viewport, the station's lights reflected off the hull of the Meridian, steady and silver in the dark. My communicator showed 4 waiting messages. 1 from Carol. 1 from Oliver. 1 from the Velhari delegation. And 1 that I looked at for a long time before opening, because the sender identification read simply, Orin High Representative, for Ambassador Osei, personal. In it, Vel had written 2 sentences. I told you I have been waiting for this conversation for 30 years. I should have said, I have been waiting for your species to be ready for it. I believe you are ready now. I read it twice. Then I set the communicator down and looked out at the dark and the lights and the patient stars. Ready, I thought. We had only just begun. The Compact of Mutual Sovereignty was signed on a Tuesday. No one had planned for a Tuesday. The Council's official protocol office had suggested a date aligned with the Orin astronomical calendar, which placed significant events on days corresponding to particular stellar positions. Vel had overruled them. She said, in the brief meeting where this was discussed, that the date should be chosen based on when the document was ready and the parties were present, not on where stars happened to be sitting at the time. I liked this. I liked it for the same reason I liked everything Vel said. It was completely direct and completely correct and arrived without apology. The document had taken 6 weeks to finalize. 6 weeks of line-by-line negotiation, of technical consultations, of Oliver producing precisely prepared data packets in response to precise questions, of Grace Linton joining us remotely for 2 days to walk the Velhari delegation through the Maravil knowledge transfer terms, of a Chekori navigation expert named Dale spending 3 hours with our route survey team reviewing the Ashkari Rift corridor specifications. 6 weeks of the slow, careful, unglamorous work of building something that would last. There had been difficult moments. There had been one session, in the 4th week, where the Thraxian delegation submitted an amendment that would have effectively given the Council oversight rights over human expansion decisions for the next 50 years, framed as a safety provision, and I had spent 90 minutes calmly and methodically explaining why that framing was not accurate and the provision was not acceptable and what we were prepared to offer in its place. Drovan had pushed back. I had held the position. Oliver had sat beside me without moving for the entire 90 minutes, which was impressive because the Thraxian technical advisor kept making sounds that the translation device rendered as a combination of a sigh and a groan. We had not agreed to the amendment. We had agreed to a joint advisory panel, which was a different thing, advisory, not binding, composed of equal members, with a rotating human chair. It was a reasonable thing to agree to, and Drovan had known it was reasonable and eventually said so, which cost him something. I did not acknowledge that it cost him something. I simply moved to the next item. That had been the turning point. After that session, the remaining items moved faster. Carol had sent me a message on day 38. It said, "I hear it is going well." Nothing else. That was Carol at maximum warmth, and I had appreciated it enormously. My mother had sent me a message on day 40, asking if I was eating enough and whether the station had good coffee, and mentioning that the neighbor's cat had figured out how to open their back gate, which was apparently causing considerable community discussion. The total ordinariness of this message, arriving in the middle of finalizing the most significant diplomatic document in human history, had made me sit down and laugh for a solid minute. Oliver had heard me through the partition wall and knocked to check if I was all right. I had told him yes and read him the message about the cat. He had also laughed, and after that the tension in our small working quarters had been measurably lower for the rest of the week. Oliver Grant, I had decided by week 5, was going to be an exceptional diplomat. He had the rarest combination of qualities, technical precision and genuine curiosity about the people across the table. He did not just absorb information. He considered it. During the navigation talks, he had noticed something in Dale's questions that I had not caught, a concern about Chekori vessel design that their delegation had not stated directly, buried in the technical language of their inquiry. Oliver had flagged it to me quietly at a break, and I had addressed it in the next session in a way that appeared to be a natural addition to our offer but that Dale had received with an immediate color shift that even I could identify as relief. Afterward, Dale had specifically thanked Oliver by name. Oliver had gone slightly pink, which was charming. The morning of the signing, I was up before the station's simulated dawn. I showered, dressed in the formal suit that the Earth delegation had agreed on 6 months ago, dark, clean, no insignia except the small silver pin on my lapel that identified me as a senior ambassador, which I had always thought looked more like something you would find in a second-hand shop than a symbol of authority, and which I wore for exactly that reason. I braided my hair the way my mother had taught me. I drank coffee that was, in fact, quite good. I stood at the viewport for a while. The station's observation windows on this level faced a direction that caught no reflected light from the nearby system star, so what I was looking at was pure dark, scattered with stars in a density I still was not used to after 3 years of deep space postings. Out there, somewhere in that dark, were the 11 systems that humanity had settled. The farms and research stations and small communities, and one very noisy argument currently happening over water rights on a moon called Keswick, for that would still be happening when I got home, because that was the nature of human things. We were always in the middle of several arguments simultaneously and somehow kept functioning anyway. Vel had said that was the engine. I thought she was right. Oliver knocked at precisely 7 in the morning, which was the time I had told him, and we walked together to the signing chamber. The corridor was quiet. Our footsteps had a rhythm to them that felt, by now, familiar. We had walked these corridors many times in 6 weeks. At the door, Oliver straightened his jacket collar with one hand and said, very quietly, "Ready?" "Yes," I said. We went in. The room held 23 people. 9 senior delegates, their aides, the council's protocol staff, 2 representatives from the station's administration, and 3 observers who had been granted honorary presence for the occasion. One of the observers was Leary's, the young Velhari official who had stopped me after the second session. Their skin was warm gold this morning, and they met my eyes across the room with an expression that I had learned, over 6 weeks of incidental encounters in corridors and break rooms and once in the queue for the station's food hall, to recognize as genuine warmth. I gave them a small nod. The signing order had been determined by a combination of council membership date and alphabetical rendering of each species' name in the council's primary lingua franca. Humans came 5th. I sat and watched as the first 4 delegates added their marks to the document, Droven pressing a stylized seal into a section of the text, the Chekori delegate using a device that recorded their genetic signature, the Velhari delegate Karen pressing their palm to the paper while their skin shifted through 7 rapid colors that I suspected the protocol staff were recording as part of the official record. Then it was my turn. The signing pen had been a human addition to the ceremony, suggested by Oliver and accepted by the protocol office with what I interpreted as polite puzzlement. It was a simple thing, black ink in a brushed silver casing, brought from Earth. Small and ordinary and ours. I stood. I walked to the document. I looked at it for a moment, the 47 pages of terms and provisions and mutual commitments, in 9 languages, printed on a material that the council used for permanent records, which would not degrade for 10,000 years. In 10,000 years, whatever came after all of us, it would still be possible to read that on this date, 5 civilizations and then 4 more had agreed to treat each other as equals. I thought about the low chairs. I thought about the 45-second speaking limit and the delayed translation feed and Droven's 3-mouthed smile. I thought about Carol in her Geneva office saying your job ends when you walk out of the room. I thought about my grandmother, who had spent her life refusing to be anchored to anyone else's definition of what she was. I signed my name. Yara Osei, Senior Ambassador, Human Earth Government. The ink was dark and clean and final. I stood back. The remaining delegates completed their signatures. The council's protocol chief announced the document as sealed and entered into permanent record. There was a sound in the chamber that I could only describe as shared exhale, as if everyone present had been holding something and had now been given permission to set it down. Afterward, there was a brief reception in an adjoining room. Drinks, small amounts of food calibrated to each species' tolerances, the low hum of many different translation devices working simultaneously. I moved through the room slowly, accepting congratulations, deflecting the more effusive ones, stopping for a real conversation with Savik, who shook my hand in the human way he had asked Oliver to teach him 3 weeks ago and whose grip was surprisingly firm for a 6-limbed creature. Droven approached me when I was alone by one of the room's windows. He had no armor. He had come to the ceremony in what appeared to be the Thraxian equivalent of a formal suit, which still looked considerably more imposing than any human formal wear, but without the ceremonial medal it was something closer to ordinary. He stood with 2 of his 4 arms at his sides and the other 2 clasped loosely in front of him, which I had learned was a Thraxian posture of approach rather than confrontation. "Ambassador Osei," he said. Delegate Droven, I said. He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Droven. In 6 weeks of negotiations, he had not been quiet often. The session 3 days after your departure from the first meeting, he said. I said that the previous session may have been structured in a manner that did not reflect appropriate protocols. He paused. That was a formal statement. I want to make an informal one. I waited. The chair height was my suggestion, he said. The translation delay was approved at my recommendation. The 45-second speaking limit was a provision I drafted. He said each of these things in the flat, factual tone of someone making a confession rather than an argument. I want you to know that because I think it matters that you know it came from a specific decision, not from an institutional habit, and that the decision was wrong. I looked at him. All 4 of his eyes met mine, which in Thraxian body language, I had learned, was significant. They did not make that kind of eye contact casually. I understand the context you were operating in, I said. The fear that drove it. The fear was real, he said. But fear is not a justification. Your species taught me that. He paused. The proposal you left on the table after walking out. I read it that evening. I spent a long time with it. It was a better offer than we deserved from a species we had just publicly insulted. He stopped again. I thought you should know that I know that. This was not what I had prepared for from Droven. I had prepared for a professional relationship, cordial and functional. I had prepared for careful management of ongoing tension. I had not prepared for this. Thank you, I said. That means something. He nodded once, a short, precise movement. I expect we will have disagreements in the future, he said. The compact is a beginning, not an ending. There will be complications. There will, I agreed. I expect you will handle them well, he said. This was, from Droven, a remarkable thing to say. His tone carried no irony. Your species is better at this than we gave you credit for. We have had a lot of practice, I said. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, but the Thraxian equivalent of recognizing a good point. He inclined his head and moved away. Oliver appeared at my side holding 2 glasses of something pale and sparkling that the station's kitchen staff had described as a neutral celebratory beverage suitable for humans. Droven, he said. An apology, I said. A real one. Oliver blinked. Well, he said after a moment. That's something. It is, I said. It really is. We stood together at the window. Outside, the station's lights caught the hull of a Velhari transport vessel moving slowly through the docking lane, its running lights blinking in a pattern I had learned meant safe transit in progress. Beyond it, in the dark between the station and the nearest inhabited system, there was nothing visible, just the space between things, which looks empty and is not. People always talk about space as empty. As the void. As the darkness between stars. But I have spent enough time in it now to know that what looks like nothing is full of things that cannot be seen yet. Pathways through rifts that no one knew existed. Compounds that grow in unexpected soil. Patience that has been building for 9 years, or 30, or 900. The things that are there before you know to look for them. The compact had been signed. The table was built on equal terms. And now came the actual work, the long, slow, complicated, frequently argumentative work of being part of something larger than yourself while remaining, fully and without apology, what you are. Someone across the room said my name. I turned. It was one of the protocol staff, asking if I could spare a moment for the official record. A photograph of some kind, or the galactic equivalent of one. I said yes and began walking toward them. Oliver fell into step beside me. In my earpiece, very faintly, a message arrived from Earth. My communicator recognized the pattern and routed it through, a short audio clip, no more than 5 seconds. My mother's voice, bright and certain, "We are very proud of you. Come home soon. The neighbor's cat is still getting into the garden and I feel you would have useful thoughts on the matter." I pressed my lips together to keep the smile from becoming a laugh, because this was a formal occasion and I was a senior ambassador and I had a photograph to take. I mostly succeeded. We stood in front of the signed compact, 9 species represented in a room lit by asteroid stone and soft station light, and the official recorder made a sound like a tone struck on crystal, and whatever device they used captured the moment. Later, when I was asked what I had been thinking at that instant, I gave the correct diplomatic answer, that I had been thinking of the significance of the occasion and the responsibility it carried for all parties involved. This was true. But I was also thinking about a cat who had learned to open a gate and a neighborhood full of people arguing about it, and my mother's voice and the specific, reliable ordinariness of being human, the fact that we had just signed a historic document with 9 alien species, and the next thing on my mind was a garden gate and the cat who had figured it out. That is us, I thought. That is exactly us. Capable of the extraordinary and immediately, cheerfully distracted by the ordinary. Never fully serious and never fully not serious. Always in the middle of 5 things, always alive to the next thing, always carrying the past with us into the next argument and the next discovery and the next room. The most advanced species in the galaxy had called us a Coast Guard with ambitions. They had been wrong about the ambitions. They had been wrong about the scope. They had been wrong about the patience and the planning and the quiet, steady accumulation of leverage in areas no one was watching. But the Coast Guard part, the idea that we were just trying to protect the water, keep the lanes open, make sure everyone got home, I thought that one was closer than Droven had intended. We were not conquerors. We had never wanted to be. We wanted the lane open. We wanted the route through the rift on the map for everyone. We wanted the medicine available. We wanted the table at equal height. We wanted what anyone wants who has ever been in a room where the chairs were deliberately set lower, to be seen as what we actually are, not what is convenient for others to believe. We had walked out of a room to make that point. And then we had walked back in, on our own terms, and built something that would be in the record for 10,000 years. Not bad, I thought, for a Coast Guard. The signing was done. The photograph was taken. The reception wound down in the slow, gradual way of events that everyone is reluctant to end, because ending them means the next thing begins, and the next thing is always more complicated than the thing you are in. I said goodbye to Vel last. She was preparing to leave the station for her home system, a journey of several weeks. We stood at the docking corridor entrance, her floating support device humming quietly at her side. I expect we will speak again soon, she said. I expect so, I agreed. There is a lot to build. There always is, she said. That is not a complaint. That is the nature of things worth building. She regarded me for a moment. You did well, Ambassador. Not just in this room. In the 9 years before this room. In the patience that made this room possible. It was not just me, I said. No, she agreed. It never is. She began to turn away, then paused. I said earlier that I had been waiting for your species to be ready. I want to correct that statement. I waited. I had been waiting for your species to know they were ready, she said. You were ready long before this. You simply needed to believe it long enough to walk out of a room and let everyone else figure it out. She moved away down the corridor, slow and steady and 900 years patient. I stood there for a moment. Oliver was behind me, tablet in hand, already looking at the next set of communications that needed addressing, because there were many and they had all arrived in the last 6 hours, and that was the job. I took one more moment, looking down the empty corridor where Vel had gone. Then I turned to Oliver. All right, I said. What have we got? He looked at his tablet. 17 communications from Earth requesting briefings. 2 from Council member delegations wanting to schedule follow-up sessions. 1 from the Chekori navigation team about a proposed collaborative survey of the rift. And 1 from Carol. What does Carol say? He looked at it. It says, well done. Now the hard part. I laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised. She is right, I said. She always is. What is the hard part? Oliver asked. I started walking. He fell into step beside me. Being what we said we were, I said. Not just in that room. Every day after it. Showing up and being the species that makes that document mean something instead of just the species that signed it. I paused. That is always the hard part. But we are good at hard parts. We have been practicing. Oliver nodded. He made a note on his tablet. He was already thinking ahead, which was exactly right. The station's corridor stretched before us, long and lit and leading somewhere. We walked.